I'm ProzaicMuze, and this is the 1.07 patch update for my Diablo 3 build guides. We'll cover how the changes affect existing builds and recommended adjustments, if any, for those using them. Before we get started, please note that I will not be covering the entire patch. This video is limited specifically to those changes that affect my guides, as eventually I'll have quite a few to cover. I've included a link in the description box for those who might have missed the patch notes, so refer to that if you're looking for a complete list of changes. The Barbarian only received a bug fix, so up first is the Bola Shot Demon Hunter. As the only change for the Demon Hunter, the bug fix causing reflect damage to properly affect Bola Shot only impacts the build when facing reflect damage elites. However, given the incredibly tanky nature of the build and the fact that the patch also changed reflect damage to a periodic buff, it's barely noticeable. Patch notes aside, it was brought to my attention that on the PTR, bolas weren't disappearing when the monster they were attached to died. Instead, all attached bolas exploded at once for the normally expected damage. I broke out fraps and scrubbed through the clips of bola stacking to verify this. When I slow this clip down, a normal bola creates a single bubble when it explodes. Here you can clearly see multiple overlapping bubbles followed by a large stack of numbers over each mob. Played back normally, it looks like a single explosion that kills everything. What this means is that the rune Imminent Doom is now much more viable given that you aren't going to lose damage from the longer delay. I honestly can't say if this is an undocumented change for the patch or if I'm just a blind idiot that missed this when first testing the build. Either way, it makes playing the build easier given that you can now fire directly into the center of a pack without worrying about lost bolas. Kudos to the individuals that brought this to my attention. The monk received the bulk of the changes this patch, and if you're a regular monk user, I encourage you to go read the patch notes for all the details. The only changes we're concerned with now, though, are the damage buffs to Sweeping Wind and Lashing Tail Kick combined with the removal of monk snapshotting. Sweeping Wind has its damage increased by 33%, which isn't very noticeable, but the overall effect of removing snapshotting actually causes a loss of damage if you were using multiple weapon sets and blinding flash. This combination isn't featured in the Hand of Etar build, but I know some of you are using it. The major change to consider, however, is that Lashing Tail Kick's damage was doubled, meaning our favorite iron cannon is now twice as viable. You can see that I made quick work of elite packs in Monster Power 1, so I jumped straight to Monster Power 5 with a Lifesteal Diablo and had no trouble dealing with this reflect damage pack. Of course, I was determined to stand in the poison, so I had to heal myself there at the end. Regardless, the buff is quite nice and the build feels much less tedious to play. Well, unless you run into holes in the ground. The Witch Doctor only received one change, and that Spirit Barrage now allows the secondary projectiles from Well of Souls to hit your target. This makes the ability easier to use for those of you who are crafty enough to target the ground next to the monster before this change. This puts the total single target damage at 425% for a somewhat more competitive damage source against lone targets like bosses. Zombie Bears is still better in the short term though. The Wizard was also featured in this patch with only slightly fewer changes than the Monk, but with no major changes to mechanics and only simple damage buffs, you don't have much to worry about. With Blizzard's damage more than doubled and proc rate increased by 25%, the Sleetstorm Wizard is now slightly faster than before. I found that with enough damage you can drag trash through blizzards while you look for elite packs. The bug fix allowing Blizzard crits to properly trigger Arcane Power and Crit also helps. The major thing to appreciate is that melee packs are now even easier to kill than before. Granted, I'm not really sure they needed to be. Blizzard's extra damage provides a meager option for dealing with fleeing ranged mobs, but overall, the Sleetstorm Wizard is better at doing what it already did quite well. That wraps up the relevant changes for this patch, and I've set to work on the next round of guides starting with the Multi-Strafe Demon Hunter. As always, like, favorite, and subscribe for more suboptimal goodness.